In March 1944, over northern Germany, 3 P-51 Mustangs disintegrated without a single shot fired. Witnesses saw white flashes near the engine mounts, then vapor trails curving down through silence. Investigators ruled out combat damage within hours. The recovered gauges told the truth. Coolant temperature locked at 480 degrees Fahrenheit, pressure exceeding valve limits. Each explosion began near 25,000 feet. The same altitude, the same sequence. Across 8th Air Force records, 30 similar losses appeared within 2 weeks. Commanders grounded units above that height, reducing power and endurance, yet the pattern held. The engines were not overheating by design. They were collapsing by physics. At Wright Field, a single test stand repeated the event. After 27 minutes of climb simulation, pressure surged, vapor filled the chamber, and the run stopped seconds before rupture. The printout formed a clean spike, proof that flow inside the radiator had reversed. Coolant, instead of cooling, trapped its own heat. No enemy bullet had touched those planes. The danger was built into them, sealed beneath rivets and deadlines. By April, fear moved faster than reports. The Mustang's greatest weapon had turned unreliable. It could cross a continent, but might not cross the next minute. By late 1943, the United States had built its ultimate long-range fighter. Assembly lines at Inglewood and Dallas produced more than 200 P-51 Mustangs each month. Each carried the Packard-built Merlin, a liquid-cooled engine delivering over 1,400 horsepower at altitude. It was precise, efficient, and dangerously hot. The system that gave the Mustang its reach also hid a flaw that no checklist could reveal. The radiator design was a compromise between power and drag. A ventral duct forced air through a glycol-filled core, then expelled it through an adjustable door under the tail. The scoop produced a faint jet effect, more speed, less cooling margin. Factory tests claimed stability within plus or minus 10 degrees, but those figures came from ground stands, not from thin air above 20,000 feet. At that height, a momentary reversal of flow could choke the coolant, turning liquid to vapor in seconds. Inside North American Aviation, small data anomalies appeared on inspection charts. Pressure oscillations occurred whenever the radiator door sat half open. The readings were minor, easily dismissed. But one engineer, Hayward, noticed a pattern. He traced each surge to the same geometry, the single-throat exit behind the pump outlet. He drafted a correction. Divide the exit duct into 2 streams, one for the hot boundary air, one for the returning coolant vapor. The change would weigh 8 pounds and delay production by half a day per aircraft. The response arrived the next morning. Rejected, non-critical. Output mattered more than refinement. The factory was timed to the minute, and the war would not wait for theory. Hayward filed the design quietly and returned to the shift floor. Outside the plant, engines were already failing. Pilots reported flickering gauges, flashes under the cowling, then sudden silence. Mechanics replaced pumps and caps, but the failures continued. Commanders called it coincidence. Test officers called it misuse. The flaw remained buried under confidence. At night, Hayward continued experiments in a small annex behind the materials shed. He built a scale model from scrap aluminum, fed air from a compressor, and logged temperature at steady RPM. The split flow worked exactly as predicted, 15% cooler, stable pressure at 2,400 psi. He recorded every result in a small notebook marked A1194, January 1944. No one asked to see it. Production accelerated through winter. Each finished Mustang rolled off the line within 4 days, sealed and painted, ready to cross the Atlantic. None carried the correction. Reports of unexplained explosions arrived weekly, each matching the same conditions: altitude, power, time. Numbers whispered what people refused to hear. By February, belief in perfection had hardened into risk. Efficiency was still measured in aircraft per day, not aircraft per survivor. Beneath every fuselage lay a calculation untested by air. They believed the system was flawless. It was, until it met the sky. At Wright Field in February 1944, engineers reopened the Mustang's thermal case after another series of mid-air explosions. Test logs described the same pattern each time: rapid temperature climb, loss of pressure, and detonation near cylinder 12. Lewis Hayward was recalled as a consultant, though the invitation sounded like formality. He arrived carrying the thin ledger labeled A1194, its pages filled with airflow calculations. No one requested it. The board's agenda listed verification of production tolerances. Redesign was not on the table. The Merlin V1650 operated at 3,000 revolutions per minute, producing 1,400 horsepower at 25,000 feet. Its liquid coolant circulated under pressures reaching 2,400 pounds per square inch. During climb, the radiator door modulated airflow through a narrow venturi under the fuselage. That door, half open, could cause the same physics that doomed earlier flights: pressure wave reversal. The coolant surged backward, turning into vapor inside its own core. The system was working against itself. Hayward traced the resonance to a specific dimension between the pump outlet and the radiator throat. The interval matched the acoustic wavelength of the pump's pulsation. Every few seconds, flow reversed for less than a blink, long enough to create internal overpressure. His proposed cure was brutally simple: divide the exit into two throats so the returning boundary layer had a separate path. One stream bled heat, the other carried vapor away. The geometry broke the resonance by scattering pressure waves before they could align. He built a full-size section from scrap aluminum and tested it on an airflow stand. Heated air at 400 degrees Fahrenheit entered through a blower calibrated to combat RPM. Thermocouples across the duct recorded a steady temperature drop of 85 degrees. Pressure remained flat, varying less than 2%. The entire modification added under 8 pounds. He presented the results to his section chief. The answer was silence, followed by a note: implementation deferred, production priority. The line could not stop. The front needed airplanes, not adjustments. The design was archived and stamped non-critical improvement. Meanwhile, loss reports reached Washington. 7 Mustangs vanished in a single week under identical conditions. Maintenance checks cleared fuel, oil, and ignition. Engineers plotted each failure altitude and found the same band between 23 and 26,000 feet, the resonance zone Hayward had drawn in his notebook. He rewrote his report without adjectives. Measured temperature, 470 degrees Fahrenheit. Measured outlet, 395. Pressure stable at 2,400 psi. Flow reversal eliminated. The sentence structure was military, the tone impersonal. Only the result mattered. In early March, the Bureau of Aeronautics authorized a limited experiment. Cooling modification number 2. The order arrived on yellow paper, unsigned. Hayward supervised the fitting of the prototype onto a test fuselage stripped of paint and serials. When the Merlin started, the gauges moved with uncanny calm. Temperature rose to operating level, then stopped. For 2 continuous hours, the line on the recorder stayed level. No oscillation, no surge. The silence in the test room felt heavier than noise. 3 additional runs confirmed the same result. The failure that had destroyed 57 aircraft was gone. Still, the directive for mass production never came. Retooling would halt the assembly line for 3 days, and 3 days meant 60 fighters. War math favored speed. The file was closed again. Hayward kept recalculating after hours. He estimated how long an unmodified radiator could survive full boost before vapor lock. The answer came in one short line: 17 minutes. Every long-range escort exceeded that number. Every pilot flying over Germany was sitting inside a countdown they could not read. Across the ocean, squadrons adapted by superstition. Some pilots kept radiator doors half open at all times. Others throttled down to cool engines that were not overheating. Mechanics replaced parts in cycles that solved nothing. The technical fault had become a psychological one. At Wright Field, frustration replaced disbelief. Senior engineers reviewed Hayward's earlier data and found nothing to contest. His logic was too plain. They ordered another round of verification, this time with independent instruments. The curves repeated perfectly. The test engineer wrote in the margin, "No fluctuation detected." For once, data overcame habit. On the 8th of April 1944, the Bureau issued a final evaluation notice. Split flow exit, field adoption authorized upon availability. That line moved through channels faster than any announcement. Tooling crews at Inglewood cleared space for a new fixture. Sheet metal orders shifted by 1% to feed an idea once dismissed. Hayward watched the first modified exit take shape under fluorescent light. The part looked ordinary, a curved rectangle of aluminum with two narrow channels. Nothing about it suggested that hundreds of lives would depend on its angle. He ran a hand along the edge to feel the airflow that would never be seen. By the end of April, the first crate of production units left the plant for an Ohio depot. Each kit carried 3 pages of instructions, 2 diagrams, and a caution. Do not over-tighten seam. Verify pressure stability at climb power. The shipment manifest recorded weight 7.6 pounds. History would record what those pounds replaced: fear, unpredictability, and the quiet arithmetic of failure. For months, engines had exploded from within. Now a correction made from scrap metal and persistence stood ready to stop it. The margin between design and disaster had narrowed to the width of a single duct. Victory in engineering rarely looks dramatic. It often begins with silence after the test run stops. And nothing breaks. April 1944 began with grounded airframes and a single instruction: convert proof into throughput. Wright Field's signal to North American Aviation was concise: fabricate retrofit kits, preserve access, weight under 8 pounds. Schedules changed by minutes, not weeks. The metric was sorties returned to altitude. The plant's clocks ticked against a graph, not a speech. On the Inglewood floor, new chalk marks appeared beneath the fuselage jigs. A small fixture team cut twin throat inserts from sheet stock and scrap. The first complete unit weighed 7.6 pounds on the bench scale. 20 rivets closed the seam. 1 continuous sealant run finished the lip. Average install time on the training shell settled at 34 minutes after 3 repetitions. A test fuselage stood open like a manual. Mechanics slid the exit divider into place, pulled a safety wire, and rethreaded thermocouples through the duct. The first run began at 0800. At 10 minutes, coolant stabilized near 415 degrees Fahrenheit. At 20, the trace held flat while throttle stepped from climb to cruise. Pressure stayed within 2400 psi, drift plus or minus 2%. The curve never lifted. By noon, a pilot batch of 50 kits was authorized. A receiving shed turned into a cell with 4 stations and 1 jig. Output started at 8 kits per shift, reached 20 by nightfall. A welder learned to hold the vane straight under heat. An inspector learned that a faint whistle meant seam tension, not danger. The change moved like a habit learned quickly. The part looked ordinary. The result did not. Hayward signed the production sheet and returned to the stand. He logged inlet 470 degrees Fahrenheit, outlet 395, dwell 27 minutes, no oscillation. The line stable appeared 3 times on 1 page. His name was absent from the directive. His numbers were not. Crates left the plant on a flatbed before dark. The manifest listed radiator exits, replacement gaskets, and a 3-page instruction. The sheet told crews to chalk a rectangle, drill pilot holes with a steel template, set the divider with a slight aft bias, and avoid over-tightening. It specified a 2-minute idle check, then 3 at climb power. The last line read simply, accept or reject by gauge. At the Ohio depot, boxes opened beside oil drums. 2 mechanics spread paper on the floor and laid out hardware like a radio kit. A senior read each step while a junior chalked the cut. Panel down, old throat out, new throat in. Sealant laid with 1 brush. Rivets tapped until the seam matched shadow. The aircraft sat on jacks for less than an hour and rolled to the test pad with wet sealant along the lip. First flight went to a check pilot over farmland. He climbed for 17 minutes through 25,000 feet with the door half open, the worst setting in earlier failures. The needle did not move. Oil stayed green on the strip. He leveled, dived shallow, then climbed again. No surge, no flash. He stamped the log with one word, stable. The word mattered more than any adjective. 3 aircraft followed in formation the next morning. Step climbs to 27,000 feet repeated the profile at fixed intervals. The recorder behind the seat traced a line like a rail, not a saw. Drift remained within plus or minus 5 degrees for 6 hours of flight, with 2 short engagements. Debrief notes contained nothing dramatic. Boredom returned to the gauge. By mid-April, Inglewood embedded the divider as a station on the route card. 2 women learned to lay sealant in a single pass. Cycle time fell below 30 minutes. A revised page entered the manual with one grainy photo. The caption read, "Exit divider installed, align with rear spar. Scrap dropped under 1%, rework disappeared once the drilling plate set hole spacing. Small corrections cleared away noise." Washington watched 3 columns. Kits produced per day, kits shipped per day, airframes modified per day. Single digits turned to dozens. The 3rd week crossed 100. Finance did not ask for cost. Loss rates to overpressure had answered already. Numbers pressed forward where arguments would stall. Policy followed the slope of the curve. Field orders restored escort altitudes in cautious steps. Climbs paused at fixed heights for checks, then resumed. No anomalies at 26,000 feet, none at 28, none at 30. The ceiling returned to the figure printed on paper. For once, paper and sky agreed. The formation's shadow stretched long over rivers because the engines finally allowed it. Engineers pushed harsher trials. 1 squadron held the radiator door at half, the resonant setting from winter. Temperatures remained flat. Another forced war emergency power for 3 minutes. Coolant rose, then stopped short of the critical band. The pump never cavitated. The test ended for fuel, not heat. Limits returned to where they had belonged since design day. A narrow worry lingered, debris lodging at the divider in winter mud or summer dust. The field answer was practical. Crews added a short brush to the bay, 1 swipe along the lip during daily checks. Inspection time grew by 10 seconds. No clogs appeared in the first month. The problem lived in notes, not in airplanes. Maintenance shifted focus back to radios, guns, and tires. At Wright Field, the incident ledger closed lines without ceremony. 9 aircraft remained unmodified. Each received priority slots between sorties. After the last kit went on, the ledger sat under dust beside obsolete gaskets. Technicians preferred active problems. Solved ones became shelves. The war advanced by forgetting the right things at the right time. Throughput told the story in fewer words than any report. 1 depot installed 48 kits in 5 days. 1 plant pressed 72 inserts in 2 shifts. Across all stations, the total surpassed 200 before month's end. Unexplained overpressure losses fell to 0 for 2 consecutive weeks, then 3. The slope was not an opinion. It was an end state forming. Pilots adapted to the new normal by not talking about it. They scanned horizons more and instruments less. In ready rooms, briefings returned to fuel math, weather layers, and weave geometry. Confidence did not announce itself. It removed a hesitation in the hand. A machine that behaves frees attention for the fight. That is the only morale an engine can give. A night foreman posted a chalk goal, 32 kits per shift. He hit 28, then 30, then 32 on day 5, and the figure stayed. Sealant smell marked the station where stability was made by hand. The sound was a rivet gun tapping regular as a metronome. Reliability often arrives as rhythm before it arrives as a number. Drag penalty received its own measurement. Flight tests recorded less than 2 miles per hour at cruise, none at escort radius, once mixture and door position were trimmed. Range in mission terms remained unchanged. The report's language was plain. Performance steady, cooling stabilized, recommendation continue. The sentence fit on 1 line. Its effect reached across a front. A short cable from 8th Air Force provided confirmation without flourish. No coolant failures recorded this week. The line took one breath to read and returned hours to a schedule. Bomber streams reclaimed their screen at height. Interceptions could be met where they formed, not where instruments demanded retreat. A small rectangle of metal had widened tactical space. Back at the stand, gauges cooled for the first time in weeks. Sensors came off. Spares went into boxes. Hayward closed his ledger with an entry as brief as his design. Exit divider operational, pressure stable at full boost, no oscillation detected. He shelved the book without ceremony. The shelf did not know it held the page that separated failure from routine. By month's close, retrofits threaded between sorties under floodlights. Chalk lines faded under rain, sealant dried to match the belly. Finished airframes rolled to the ramp with a seam invisible from the cockpit and present in every instrument. They lifted into patterns that no longer ended in a white plume. The avalanche moved in crates, jigs, and practiced hands. The noise it made was the absence of explosions. Night convoys began listing the exit divider as controlled cargo. Crates left Newark after dusk, reached Liverpool at tide, then moved by lorry to dispersal fields. Depot clerks timed each job the way crews time takeoff rolls. An average airframe consumed 50 minutes with 2 mechanics, or roughly 1.7 labor hours. That figure translated cleanly into daily capacity. It told planners how many tails could return to altitudes where escort mattered rather than altitudes where fear had held them. A revised instruction sheet added a proof step that fit the field. Run at 2,300 revolutions per minute for 5 minutes with the door at half. Step to 2,800 for another 5. Photograph the gauges with a hand camera and staple the print to the form. In the snapshots, needles sat steady around 410 degrees Fahrenheit. Paper replaced argument. A picture and a tail number closed debate quicker than a memo could. Escorts resumed ladder climbs they had abandoned in winter. A small recorder behind the pilot traced temperature as a continuous graphite line. Old traces looked like teeth. New traces resembled rails. One 6-hour flight wandered within plus or minus 5 degrees despite 2 brief engagements. The debrief contained little prose, a circle around the flat band, and a single word: normal. The word said that altitude had returned to procedure instead of gamble. Inglewood standardized the drilling template that placed pilot holes. A steel plate fixed spacing from the rear spar and stopped ovaling. Rework dropped close to 0 by plant records. Scrap fell under 1% of inserts. A runner began fetching sealant by the gallon instead of by the tin. The smell marked the station where thermal stability was being mass-produced by brush and wrist more than by theory or speech. By the 3rd working week, an Ohio depot found rhythm. At first light, 12 airplanes rolled in. Before dark, 12 rolled out. A chalked grid on the concrete marked waiting bays, each with a clock and a cart. A crew lead walked the line with a stopwatch, not to hurry men but to synchronize handoffs. The choreography produced time. Time turned into sorties. Sorties returned pressure to the enemy rather than to the coolant tank. Commanders restored escort ceilings in deliberate steps. Crews were told to pause at 26,000 feet, check, then rise. Pause at 28,000, check again, then climb to 30,000. Reports noted no anomalies at each rung. The ceiling printed in manuals finally matched the one flown in the sky. Range planning lost a column of caveats. The geometry of protection settled where the campaign had needed it since design day. Engineers asked for harsher trials before declaring victory. One squadron flew with radiator doors held at half, the setting that had once triggered resonance. Temperatures stayed flat across climb and weave. Another unit pulled war emergency power for 3 minutes. The coolant rose, held below the critical band, then drifted down. Pumps did not cavitate. The trial ended because fuel planning said so, not because heat forced it. Limits moved back to range and weather where they belonged. A narrow worry lingered about debris catching on the divider lip after rain or in summer dust. The field fix was simple and repeatable. A short brush hung in each bay. One swipe along the seam during daily checks cleared grit. Inspection time grew by perhaps 10 seconds. No clog appeared that month or the next. The concern stayed in notes instead of on aircraft. Mechanics returned to radios, guns, and the chores that win sorties quietly. Wright Field's incident ledger closed failures line by line as tail numbers received kits. 9 unmodified airframes remained on the first list. Each earned priority slots between sorties until the last seam set. Afterward, the ledger went to a shelf beside obsolete gaskets and retired fixtures. Technicians prefer problems that move. Solved ones become storage. That is how an Army remembers progress without saying the word remember. Throughput told the story with fewer syllables than any communique. One depot installed 48 dividers across 5 days. One plant pressed 72 inserts in 2 shifts. Across stations, totals cleared 200 before the month's end. Unexplained overpressure losses fell to 0 for 2 weeks, then 3. The slope of the line on the chart bent and did not rise again. Decisive is a quiet adjective when numbers carry it. Pilots adapted the way professionals always adapt, by removing hesitation. Eyes returned to horizon and weave geometry. Hands stopped hovering near radiator controls and climb. In ready rooms, briefing time shifted back to fuel, weather, and rendezvous. A machine that behaves returns attention to tactics. That transfer cannot be drawn elegantly, but it can be felt in radiocom and in formation spacing steady at altitude. On the night shift, a foreman chalked a target on a board, 32 kits per shift. He reached 28, then 30. On the 5th night, the count held at 32 and did not slip. Rhythm preceded metrics, then confirmed them. The metronome was a rivet gun tapping even strokes. Stability announced itself as cadence first, statistics second, celebration never. The work sounded the same, only its consequence changed. Drag penalty earned its own small paragraph in the test digest. Cruise speed declined by less than 2 miles per hour. Escort radius and mission profile did not change once mixture and door position were trimmed. That phrasing mattered to planners who think in arcs and fuel. The trade was settled by arithmetic, not by taste. A narrow rectangle of aluminum had bought stability large enough to cancel its own cost. A cable from 8th Air Force arrived without flourish. No coolant failures recorded this week. The line took one breath to read. Its consequence returned hours to schedules and confidence to maps. Bomber streams could count on screens at the heights where interceptions formed, not at the altitudes where instruments once forced retreats. A part that fit under one hand widened an air corridor measured in nations. At the test stand, gauges cooled for the first time in weeks. Technicians unbolted sensors, boxed spares, and tagged lines. Hayward closed his ledger with an entry as plain as the metal he had shaped. Exit divider operational. Pressure stable at full boost. No oscillation detected. He left the book where dust would gather because nothing urgent remained to write. Silence at the bench was now a result, not an absence. By month's end, retrofits threaded between sorties under floodlights and rain. Chalk lines blurred on wet concrete. Sealant dried to match the belly plate. Finished airframes rolled down the ramp with seams invisible from the cockpit yet present in every instrument. They lifted into patterns that no longer ended in a white plume over fields or towns. The change moved by crate, by jig, by practiced hands. Its sound was the missing explosion. A final field exam came in heavy cloud where ice builds on lips and inside scoops. De-icing boots pulsed along the wings. The radiator door cycled under its regulator. Old behavior would have written a spike, a cough, a flash. None appeared. The Merlin ran like a clock, set tight, and left alone. The pilot wrote 3 words in his pocketbook, heat, good, and ice, then underlined them twice before the ink bled and missed. Washington asked for a summary that could sit in policy. Hayward drafted 4 lines. Weight 7.6 pounds. Average install 50 minutes. Temperature at climb 410 degrees Fahrenheit nominal. Failure rate since adoption 0. The memo contained no appeal and no rhetoric. It offered a floor on which to place a directive. Committees signed because numbers require less courage than novelty when war is the sponsor. Recognition moved slower than crates and faster than memory. A technical circular credited experimental cooling modification 2 and omitted names. The omission did not matter to airplanes or to crews. Names keep score for people. Machines keep score for missions. At squadron scale, the benefits multiplied beyond survival. Stable temperatures improved mixture control, eased door management, and returned small minutes to radius. Minutes became routes that had been out of reach in winter. Engine shops logged fewer pump replacements as cavitation vanished. Bearings that once wore invisibly now met overhaul intervals with margin. Freed man-hours shifted to radios, guns, and items that influence combat directly. Stability multiplies because every system that stops failing returns time to another. The effect is mundane and decisive, which is the precise tone of victory in engineering. By early May, new production airframes left the line with the divider from birth. The bin received a normal drawing number. Supply clerks stopped writing the word kit on manifests because the cure had ceased to be a cure. It was now a feature. Future readers of forms would assume the part had always existed because that is how success hides, in routine and in absence of alarms. On a clear day later that month, a formation crossed the Rhine with thin air beneath the wings. Gauges glowed and said nothing worth remarking. The leader thought about spacing and fuel and weather over the route home. He did not think about ducts, pumps, or oscillation. The absence of thought measured the victory more honestly than any speech could. The engine had vanished into reliability again, which is where engines belong in war. Wright Field compiled the quarters terminals. Aircraft lost to internal overpressure before modification, 57. After modification, 0. Units produced, 300 plus or minus 10% by factory records. Install time, 50 minutes. Speed cost at cruise, less than 2 miles per hour. Mission range change, none. The last line read, recommendation permanent. The signatures below were shorter than the months behind them. The avalanche ended without spectacle. Output met need. Need declined as failures disappeared. Stability became background hum. The campaign rolled forward with a correction so small it fit under a palm. It left behind a part number, a flat curve, and a silence where reports used to be. That silence was the sound of men who reached home at altitude. June 1944 opened with a clean page in the failure log. No coolant incidents, no unexplained losses. The pattern had not changed by chance, it had ended. For the first time in a year, every Mustang in active service flew without thermal restriction. The temperature curve that once climbed toward destruction now traced a calm, level band. Absence replaced anxiety. It felt unnatural at first. Then it became the new routine. The Air Technical Service Command compiled comparison data. Before modification, 12 failures per 1,000 sorties. After, less than 0.2. Engineers called that number statistically extinct. Pilots called it silence. The war had many sounds, bomb blasts, radio calls, gunfire, but none as powerful as the silence that comes when machines stop dying. At Wright Field, Hayward reviewed the curves. The spike that once stabbed upward now lay flat as horizon. Each inch of paper told a history of loss undone. The coolant flow had learned balance. Heat had found a path out. He penciled one word under the graph, steady. It was not pride. It was confirmation. The system was no longer an experiment. It was a law of its own. Washington read the numbers before reading the names. The slope was too clear to debate. A directive followed within 48 hours. The split-flow exit would be standard on all new Mustangs and adopted for upcoming jet prototypes. The order carried no signature other than approved. Recognition was unnecessary when the data already testified. On the production floor, nothing looked extraordinary. The divider had become another step, another fixture, another serial in a column. To the crews, the duct under the belly was as unremarkable as the wing root. But to the engines, it was freedom, heat leaving where it once trapped itself. The factory smelled of oil and solvent, not crisis. The war outside had shifted. Its front line was now measured in decimals. In Europe, the effect unfolded across sky and distance. The P-51 finally achieved the role its shape had promised, long-range escort without ceiling limit. The Merlin engine now held 410 degrees Fahrenheit under sustained climb. Pilots who once feared gauges now trusted them again. The aircraft could accompany bombers from England to Berlin through flak and return without a single detonation from within. Endurance defined victory more than speed ever could. The average mission grew by 20 minutes. That single metric allowed bomber formations to stay under escort longer to choose routes instead of accept them. Commanders redrew maps, closing gaps once left open by mechanical caution. The margin bought by airflow was measured not in miles, but in confidence. The system's effect multiplied down the chain. Mechanics spent fewer hours replacing pumps or flushing coolant. Cavitation scars disappeared from impeller blades. Bearings survived overhaul intervals intact. Shops that once stocked spare radiators now stored ammunition. Logistics followed thermodynamics. The steadier the flow, the smoother the war. In late June, a report crossed desks in London. No cooling-related losses since modification. The phrase occupied a single line in small type, but it represented more than hardware. It meant escort formations could now climb to meet interceptors rather than retreat to save engines. Battles that once ended in dispersal now ended in control. A defect fixed in metal had rewritten air doctrine. At Wright Field, a final verification run confirmed the change was absolute. The same test stand that had once screamed to rupture now hummed steady for 3 hours at full power. Coolant held 410 degrees Fahrenheit, oil 60 psi, pressure variance within plus or minus 2%. When the run stopped, the room stayed quiet. No one clapped. The absence of failure was applause enough. Hayward initialed the chart and added one note: stable to limit. His handwriting matched the first entry from 6 months before, when the same machine had nearly detonated. Between those lines lay the narrow distance between doubt and proof. By August, all production lines had integrated the twin throat as standard. The part was now known by its drawing code, not its history. The term kit disappeared from manifests. Engineers updated manuals, listing the modification as Radiator Exit Type B, Field Validated. It sounded bureaucratic, which meant it had succeeded completely. The Bureau of Aeronautics assembled a summary for policy archives. The text avoided names, adjectives, and context. Cooling irregularities, Mustang series, resolved by geometry change, no further issue. Bureaucratic understatement became history's punctuation. Behind it stood the simplest of causes, a single engineer who had not accepted normal graphs as final truth. Field data revealed secondary benefits. Range increased by 1.5% from optimized door control. Maximum altitude extended to 30,000 feet. Mean time between overhauls rose 20%. The Mustang had not gained power. It had lost waste. That small subtraction translated into hundreds of returning pilots. One maintenance officer summarized it better than any statistic: engines breathe again. His words appeared once in a depot report, later quoted in a training circular. It was the closest thing to poetry an operations log would ever print. Recognition, when it came, was collective. The engineering division at Wright Field received a general citation for advancement of operational reliability. No signatures below, only a seal. The individuals inside the office read it, nodded, and returned to new tests. War factories reward by continuation, not by pause. Hayward stayed silent. His name remained absent from directives and medals. He declined to transfer to jet programs, requesting instead to remain with piston test work. He said only, "Turbines will not need me." He had already proven enough in numbers. By autumn, the P-51 had become a constant presence over Europe. Formations flew higher, longer, tighter. German fighters now faced opponents that could wait. Mechanical reliability became strategic endurance. Each Mustang that returned carried not just fuel and bullets, but a proof of concept, the idea that precision could win battles faster than quantity. The transformation was invisible to those flying. They saw clouds, contrails, gauges that did not move. What they did not see was the airflow pattern below them, the silent geometry that made every flight routine. Success in engineering hides itself perfectly. The better it works, the less it is noticed. Hayward's final entry in his ledger came in December 1944. The ink had faded, but the numbers remained legible. Failure rate, 0 since April. Retrofit complete. Principal transferable. He closed the book and stored it with tools marked obsolete. Nothing in war ages faster than what works. The Bureau later cited the cooling principle when designing the P-80's jet ducts. The phrase dual-flow exit for pressure balance reappeared in specification notes, detached from its origin. The idea had left its author, but not its purpose. By the end of 1944, Allied aircraft no longer feared their own heat. The mechanical self-destruction that had haunted them a year before had vanished into procedure. The Mustang's design, once a balance of performance and fragility, had reached equilibrium. The flaw that almost grounded it had instead taught a generation of engineers what endurance meant. The war rolled forward on that quiet stability. Hundreds of engines that would have burst continued running. Dozens of pilots who might have vanished returned to land and fight again. No ceremony marked it, no monument carried their names. Only the absence of accidents measured the scale of success. When the Bureau summarized 1944's technical milestones, the coolant correction earned 2 lines near the bottom. Field improvement validated. Failure rate reduced to nil. No adjective followed, no commentary attached. That was how precision victories were recorded, in silence and in digits. In the mathematics of war, every variable carries weight. Some are visible, tanks, sorties, tonnage. Others stay hidden, like the airflow inside one fighter's radiator. Both decide outcomes. The engine that once threatened to destroy itself now symbolized balance achieved through persistence. A machine that endured because one man refused to ignore one spike on one graph. He never spoke publicly about the change. He did not need to. The numbers had already spoken for him. The war moved on. His principle remained. The numbers had already decided. By 1945, the cooling fix had become invisible, absorbed into blueprints, manuals, and habits. The Mustang's final production blocks left Inglewood with the split-flow exit built in, not added. Mechanics no longer called it a modification. It was simply there, as if it had always existed. In logbooks across Europe and the Pacific, one recurring line appeared beneath engine performance. Coolant system satisfactory. Nothing else needed saying. When the war ended, Wright Field engineers boxed the records. Among them sat a thin notebook labeled A1194. Its pages contained airflow equations, pressure margins, and pencil graphs drawn in a steady hand. The file went into storage with tags marked obsolete. Victory had erased urgency. To history, the problem was solved. To bureaucracy, it was finished. North American Aviation pivoted to peacetime work, trainers, then early jets. The new propulsion age faced hotter chambers, faster exhaust, and the same laws of flow. Designers studying turbine bleed and tailpipe resonance unknowingly reused Hayward's pattern. Divide the stream, equalize the pressure, maintain velocity. The method lived on without a name. By 1946, Packard engineers adapting liquid channels for the XP-80 noticed that a twin exit duct provided steadier pressure at climb power. The report called it a proven geometry derived from wartime experience. No author cited. The lesson had detached from the man who wrote it. In 1947, the U.S. Air Force replaced the Army Air Forces. Its first jet maintenance manual included one short sentence under thermal management. Dual-path exhaust verified effective under combat load. The line contained no dates, no origins. The idea had become doctrine. Hayward left Wright Field quietly that same year. His file closed with a single sentence. Released to civilian sector, no correspondence. He returned to Michigan, teaching mechanics at a small technical school. Students knew him only as Mr. Hayward, the airflow man. He spoke little of the war, except to say that every system fails first in imagination, then in metal. 2 decades later, restored Mustangs appeared at air shows. Photographers loved their polished wings and red noses. Few noticed the 2 narrow slots beneath the fuselage. Curators listed them as radiator exits, standard design. The small divider that once ended explosions had merged into the aircraft's anatomy. The greatest fixes are the ones no one can separate from the whole. In 1973, when the Air Force declassified wartime engineering correspondence, one paragraph surfaced in a 50-page release. Cooling irregularities, P-51 series, field correction designed by L. Hayward, validated January to April 1944. The line stood alone, surrounded by administrative notes. No photograph, no follow-up. But the paper completed a circle. The record existed again, clean and factual without embellishment. By then, Hayward was gone. The memo reached no family. It circulated briefly among historians, then vanished into microfilm. Yet every surviving Mustang still carried his geometry, channeling air exactly as his equations had drawn it. History tends to praise what explodes, not what endures. Hayward's work prevented nothing visible. No plume, no wreckage, no drama. His triumph lived in the missing entries of crash reports and in the blank lines of maintenance logs. The measure of his success was the silence he created. War ends loudly. Its solutions fade quietly. The engineer's rejected idea outlasted the noise that once ignored it. His divider saved 300 fighters, defined the heat discipline of jet design, and proved that perfection in war is rarely invention. It is correction done precisely, then forgotten. The Merlin's heat had once betrayed its power. He had taught it restraint. Through that restraint came endurance, and through endurance came victory. The war rewrote many limits of metal and math. Hayward's small correction rewrote one more, that even in total war, the narrowest channel of thought can change the widest sky. Today, under museum lights, a restored P-51 stands immaculate and silent. Its polished skin gleams beneath glass, but beneath the fuselage, 2 narrow slits remain, the twin exits drawn in graphite on a sheet at Wright Field in 1944. Visitors see wings, color, victories. They do not see airflow. The guide speaks of speed, range, and aces. He does not mention temperature bands, psi tolerances, or the single engineer who flattened a curve that once killed engines. Yet every time the propeller turns for a demonstration flight, the air still divides exactly as Hayward calculated. Stability continues as motion, invisible and exact. For historians, the record begins with a forgotten file number. For the airplane, it never ended. Each surviving Mustang carries the same unseen geometry, an experiment turned standard, a risk turned routine. It ended as it began, in silence. No applause, no ceremony, only endurance written in airflow. They had built a fighter to win the war. He had made it safe enough to outlive it.